Good morning all. My name's Gus, and as Matt has said, I'm going to bring you the message this morning. A little bit of disclosure up front before we start on a couple of fronts. I think Matt's probably set the bar a little bit too high for me by saying I'm going to talk about rest and doing it well, because actually that's one of the things we need to talk about is actually doing rest not particularly well. So I think there's going to be a little bit more of that than the well, but hopefully we can get there. As you know, we're sort of having a series on this topic for the month of January. We had Renata speak to us last week and give us some great biblical reference around God's view of rest and particularly Sabbath and the place for Sabbath. So that was really helpful. A bit like you, Robin, I always find when I listen to Renata, there's always something new that I didn't know that I found out. And then I think in a couple of weeks we've got Phil as well. And so I think there's going to be sort of possibly a little bit of overlap, I think, in the messages that you're going to get, but I think that mightn't be a bad thing anyway. And maybe think of it for those who like Shrek, it's like an onion, it's got layers. I think rest is one of those things, there's lots of layers to try and peel and understand. So, okay, just before I start, maybe I'll just pray and commit our time together. Father, just make it that we hear from you this morning, please. Whether the words that I use are the right ones or not is sort of a little bit secondary. We'd really like to hear from you. So by your Spirit, please work in the hearts and the minds of all those here at Mornington, at Lena Valley, online and wherever else they'd be engaging with this message. And please just show us something of the importance of rest and how you'd like us to move towards that in a positive way. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so I usually don't mind speaking in front of a group, particularly when I know what I'm talking about. If it's something that I've got some sort of expertise around, that's not a difficult thing. When it's something that is a little bit theoretical and I haven't potentially nailed it, it gets a little bit trickier. And today is definitely going to be more in that sort of situation. So I think Matt asked me if I'd like to speak because he and I have had some conversations around a number of things. He's encouraged me quite a bit over the last couple of years to read a bit more widely, and I have actually taken that up, and so I've read quite a lot of books. In fact, I don't read because I fall asleep if I try and read. I've gone to Audible books, and I find that great because I can actually keep moving and it keeps me awake and I'm a bit more stimulated. So I've listened to a number of books, and one of them is by an author named John Mark Comer, and he's written a book that really did, speak to me, and it challenged me, actually. The first time I listened to it, and I've done that probably 3 or 4 times now, and I'd have to say I'm certainly on a journey to try and implement or at least process how do I take that stuff on board, and what am I prepared to do about that. And so that's the sort of the perspective I'm going to be talking to you from this morning. I'm a person on the journey. I've learnt some things, I've been shown some things, I want to share some of those with you, but there's a lot of work to do. I know also that Phil actually has recently read the same book as well, and so he'll probably touch on that as well. And so anyone who's interested, absolutely you can go and get a copy of it yourself, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And I'll talk to you about why it's titled that in just a moment. Also, I'll probably just touch on a few things from another author that I really like as well. Get a lot from Brene Brown's work, and particularly the power of vulnerability and some of the things she's talking about in terms of some of the underlying drivers of behaviour in the human context, and some of those resonate with me as well. So I'll tell you the punchline of the talk before I go any further, which is always a bit of a risk, giving away the gold too early. But basically, the hypothesis that's presented by the author is that hurrying through life is the antithesis of a spiritual life. So that being in a hurry and taking life in a hurried manner is actually going to be something that is contrary to having a spiritual life. That's the hypothesis. And then he goes on to talk about that in quite some detail. And I guess that's challenged me because I'm a person who does hurry. And, hurry through life, what does that actually mean? Well, on a day-to-day basis, if you're just generally in a bit of a rush to get things done, then, you've potentially got a bit of a hurry problem. The sort of the corollary of that is that rushing is a surefire way not to hear from God. So if you're in a rush, and you're zooming around, bouncing from one thing to another in a great hurry, it's unlikely that you're going to hear that still small voice that we know is characteristic of God speaking to us. So I guess that's the challenge that I have, and that I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Now, I guess there's a fairly simple test. It comes early in the book that I can put to you just to sort of try and self-assess whether you think you've got a bit of a hurry problem going on. So there's three little questions. Are you the sort of person who looks for the shortest or the fastest checkout line when you're waiting to pay for your groceries? Do you look as you're approaching traffic lights and count the cars ahead and pick either the fastest lane or the lane with the least number of cars? Or when you're multitasking and trying to do many things at once, do you sometimes actually forget what one or other of those tasks is about? And if you say yes to any or all of those, even on a semi-frequent basis, then I guess I'd suggest to you may have a little hurry problem that you want to just look into a little bit further, because that's a sort of an indicative sign that, hurrying is actually having an impact on the way you're living life. So there's two main issues that this raises for me, or that I've been able to ascertain, and that I have to try and monitor and keep a check on. One is that you can develop a mindset of approaching life and looking at life as a series of obstacles that need to be encountered, or hurdles to get over. And I guess, it's not a particularly harmful thing in itself, it's just a way of looking at life, but it does a couple of things which is not great. One thing that does, or I find that it can do, is it tends to mean you often defer, so you'll put things off. So you've got something important to do, but you've got a series of obstacles or challenges that need to be addressed. And so it's very easy to say, look, I'll get to that as soon as I get X done. I've just got to nail this next thing. I've just got to get this report written, get this thing made, get something fixed at home, get a sermon prepared for goodness sake, Trouble is, that list of things that need to be done doesn't end. It'll just keep going. There's always another thing and another thing that will come. And so if you're deferring things like taking time out, rest and recovery, quiet time, things like that, then it's quite plausible that you'll actually end up deferring that or delaying that indefinitely, and you just won't get around to it. And that can become habitual, and it can become a bit limiting then in terms of what you can achieve. Another one that's related to that is that the first thing that can go out the window is actually slowing down enough to find that you actually do enter rest, and that you should actually do that in a meaningful way. So by having a view that there's just challenges and tasks, it generally tends to create speed, and it means that the pace that you're going at doesn't tend to reduce, and it's quite hard then to get into a space of rest and recovery. I suppose another issue then that I have had to confront is, and this sort of, I suppose, is a little bit more informed by Brené Brown's work, is that you can think of being busy as something of a badge of honour. It infers status, it provides self-worth, it gives you value, it gives you a bit of purpose. And so if you're holding on to thinking of your busyness as something that really supports you as an identity, that's can become problematic in itself as well. And Brené Brown talks about the shame triggers that might sit beneath that might actually cause you to hold on to that. Things like being very concerned about the perception of laziness or weakness, or even being weak enough to get sick. Some people just like to, and it's something that I've noticed, just deny that you're actually run down and getting sick and just keep pushing on. The old soldier on, Codral ad. That's not a very healthy space to get into. And she talks about the need to cultivate play and rest and let go of exhaustion as a status symbol and productivity as self-worth. And I guess in a work environment, that can actually creep in and become quite embedded in your consciousness, or your subconscious rather. So I guess the current predicament, as I see it, in our sort of modern society, the society we all inhabit, we actually lack for very little. We are people, and we're in a time when we've pretty much got all the things we need. Everything's pretty much laid on. And the dichotomy in this is that we actually are suffering a crisis of scarcity. And that is that there's a pervasive attitude and mindset that we don't have enough of the things that we need to be who we need to be. Things like, I don't have enough money, I don't have enough energy, I don't have enough opportunities, enough leisure. The biggest one of all, the biggest lack of resource that's, I think, experienced in our day and age is time. We just don't have enough time. And the amount of times, and you hear that in the workplace all the time, I didn't have time to get round to X. Well, we all have the same amount of time. No one has any more or less than anyone else. It's actually what we do with that time that's the real indicator. But this notion that we don't have enough time and therefore we're sort of running on nearly empty a lot of the time is something that even as Christians we can get pretty heavily sucked into that space as well. I don't know whether many people in the room would admit to, that first thing you feel when you wake up in the morning is you feel tired, I didn't get enough sleep and I've got too much to do. And then you go through the day in a fairly busy manner trying to achieve a lot, and the last thing you think as you're going to bed and trying to fall asleep is, I didn't get enough done and I can't get to sleep. And that's sort of endemic of a day that's filled with this notion of scarcity and hurrying and not being attentive to the things that actually need to be done and maybe making some hard choices about what doesn't need to be attended to. So we have with us now an array of technology that didn't actually exist when a lot of people in this room were born. So, we are in an age, the digital age, they refer to it. So most of us, I think, would have one of these. It's not just a phone, it's a smartphone. I think we're all very sort of familiar with the way those things work, but whether we actually have taken a sober look at the impact they're having on our lifestyle is another question. Some of the research suggests that we engage with our phone or touch our phone up to 2,000 times a day. I find that a little bit hard to believe, but anyway, maybe it does happen. Less hard to believe, I find that the claim is that people would spend at least 2 hours a day looking at their phone or engaging with their phone, and that's probably not at all unlikely in my estimation. One of the things about the technology that we're dealing with on a daily basis is it's actually been intentionally designed as a distraction and to create addiction. So the way a lot of the apps and the things that we engage with there are actually generated to make that actually occur, and to think that you're tough enough, clever enough, able to resist that is a little bit naive, because the people that actually create these things, they do know what they're doing and they're actually producing content that's very seductive. I read somewhere that the average Netflix user watches a series, a binge they call it, in 5 days. So we find something we like and then we just get into it and just do a deep dive into that. And that the CEO of Netflix was quoted as saying that the biggest enemy of their business is sleep. So what they're trying to do is counter sleep and make sure you don't get much sleep because they want you engaging with Netflix more. So the stream of information and the feedback that's coming at us is relentless. And it sort of masks itself as reality. We're seeing what people are doing, what's going on around the place, what's happening, all the things that we should be involved in. It's sort of dressed up as reality, but I think if we, sort of peel, you don't have to peel very much off, you realise it's not really reality, but it's actually created a whole new genre of what we used to refer to as keeping up with the Joneses. Comparison has become a real weapon that's used to try and compare people, where are you at compared to X, and that then gives you motivation generally to go and spend money, to go and buy something or try and change your circumstance, but it's certainly not in a direction that creates your life or makes your life more spiritual, not necessarily. So issues that we can experience because as a result of being consistently rushed and in a hurry, things such as irritability, hypersensitivity, emotional numbness, restlessness or even hyperactivity and multitasking, disordered priorities, lack of self-care and escapist behaviour, trying to avoid things, and then feeling disconnected from others, even though we're constantly connected via streams and channels of communication, just feeling a deeper sense of disconnection. If those things, not necessarily showing up for us all day, every day, but those things do tend to colour our lifestyle more, I think, in the digital age than past generations, and we really have to be aware and awake up to that. So if you were to ask the question, what is the greatest challenge to your spiritual life? And this is a question I've considered or been considering recently. You might think things like New Age or postmodern influences in the culture. Some of the struggles that I guess Christian church is facing, declining attendances, perceived lack of support for Christian values in some of our areas that we engage. I'd have to say I don't think any of those things are an actual threat to your spiritual life. More likely is going to be something like being distracted by devices or by the internet or by other external sources that are calling for your time. Netflix, Facebook, Instagram addiction, numbing, and by numbing I mean just looking through, scrolling through things in a very superficial way to try and blot out maybe what needs to be done or needs to be attended to as a way of just filling in time and making us feel basically numb. It just reduces the sensitivity to any pain that might be needing to be dealt with. And I guess it's a lot less likely that we are going to renounce our faith because of any of this. What's more likely to happen is it will distract ourselves into a very mediocre version of life, a superficial life that doesn't actually experience God's goals and God's Spirit in our life, and we don't get to see the hand of God working in our lives. That's a much more likely outcome than basically being turned off, saying that you're a Christian if you are someone who's actually already committed their life to Jesus. So the answer for this, I think, is not that we need more time, because I think it's pretty self-evident what we would do if we had more time. We'd probably just cram additional things into it. I know I certainly would. If I had a 28-hour day, I could get another 4 hours of, things done in the garden or other, tasks. But I'm not sure I would put 4 hours extra into rest and recovery and trying to communicate with God's Holy Spirit. So I don't think extra time is actually the answer to it. Renata touched on last week New Year's resolutions, and I agree, Renata, I'm not a big fan, to be honest. It's not something I've chosen to do in recent part of my life. I guess one of the issues with that is what you're drawing on is willpower. And willpower is actually just the capability you have within yourself today to actually do something different to what you were doing yesterday. So it's a little bit like, I think the old analogy was pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. So willpower is just trying to make a decision and tapping into your own internal resources and choosing to do something differently. Unfortunately, it's not particularly sustainable relying on willpower alone to make changes in your life. That's been my experience anyway. And it would seem that the social media algorithms are definitely designed with willpower in mind, and they're very rife at being able to circumvent your ability to choose to switch off. So we're going to have to look for something a little bit more potent than willpower, I guess, is the point. So a question you might ask then is, what would happen if God touched my life as often as I touch my phone? As often as I engage with some of these other stimuli, what would happen if I was actually engaging with God, even in a fraction of that degree? I think most people here, in fact, I imagine all people that turn up to a church service would find the life of Jesus compelling. We look at Jesus' life, we read about it predominantly in the Gospels, and it's very attractive. We actually really like the way Jesus went about things. But a more difficult thing is to actually try and understand, how can I actually experience more of that lifestyle, more of the type of life that Jesus experienced, not just know about it in a theoretical sense, believe in it, and try and, by my own best endeavours, mimic that as best I can. How can we actually experience more of the life that Jesus had? And there's a great quote that John Mark Comer has in his book. He says that if you want to experience the life of Jesus, you need to practice the lifestyle of Jesus. So what that means is you're not going to actually become more like that unless you start putting into practice behaviours that Jesus has modelled and gives us a very good demonstration of how to do it. That notion of being an apprentice under Jesus, apprenticeships these days is not It's not a very powerful way of training people. The next generation aren't tending to go and do a lot of apprenticeships, and even those that do in trades and things like that, I've seen a bit of this happen. It's not like when they talk in the Bible what an apprenticeship was, which was actually just sitting underneath someone who's actually you look up to, who's on a journey doing things in a way that you want to mimic, and you're basically learning a lifestyle and a way of approaching the world and the work the way that person does. We don't take that sort of model for apprenticeship much these days. We tend to take a much more cerebral approach. We read scripture, we think it sounds really good, we say, right, that's good, I'm going to try and implement some of that over the course of my week, and then we tend to not do an awful lot out of it after we've left and headed home for lunch. So I think what we need to do, and what I need to try and do, is find ways to spend time so that the practices and habits and the reflexes of Jesus become the practices and habits and reflexes that I display. And you're not going to do that quickly. This is not going to be an instantaneous thing. And I think it's going to be quite challenging to do that across a whole lot of fronts. But this area of rest is certainly an area I think it's something that I want to try and push into in the coming, it could be months, it could be years, I don't know. Let's see how that journey goes. So what does Jesus offer us? So I've got a couple of readings that I have decided I'd stick in here, and I made the font nice and big so I don't have to put my glasses on. So in Matthew 11, verse 28 to 30, and this will be a very well-known verse to most people. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So all those who are weary and burdened and want rest, come to Jesus. And what does Jesus give you? Long service leave? A new mattress? Unfortunately not. You get a yoke. And what that actually feels like, it feels like just to do work. And it's like, what gives here? Why am I'm just getting more work to do. I actually wanted a break. And the powerful thing of this, and I guess maybe I'm not sure if I'm going to explain it very well, but it's that Jesus actually offers something much, much bigger than a rest. He's actually offering you insights into a system of doing life where the burdens can actually not be the thing that makes you weary and tired, and you can actually get refreshed as you do the journey with Jesus, which is the work of life. So maybe another way of interpreting that is my yoke is easy, meaning that it'll be a good fit for you. It's not going to be uncomfortable. You should be able to bear up well under that. And my burden will be light, as in Jesus is going to do the heavy lifting. So he's not going to put anything on you that you can't actually bear, but you actually have to put the yoke on and you have to go and do the journey with Jesus. So, if you're struggling under a lot of burden and you're sort of, cursing Jesus for it and saying, well, this is not fair, God, why are you doing this to me? I think you probably just need to actually, put that burden off and put the yoke on and do the job with Jesus. It will be a lot better outcome, I think. I'll just read you the Message version of this because I quite like it. It's a little bit more contemporary. Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. So I guess the yoke is trying to adopt Jesus' lifestyle, not just the ideas, the theology, but the lifestyle and the practices. So an easy life, as we know, is a myth. It's a bit of a mirage. It's not all going to get, instantaneously easier. But Jesus can actually relieve the burden and the heavy weight. The expectation of others can actually come off your shoulders, and that will be, what actually allows you then to enter into rest. So in terms of hurry, so if hurry is the great enemy of a spiritual life, as the hypothesis that I stated at the start said, John Mark Comer does outline 4 areas of practices that you could look towards to try and change your experience. And those are practicing silence and solitude, observing the Sabbath, moving towards simplicity, and slowing your body, your thoughts, your desires and ambitions. So I'm going to talk about the first and the last of those, and I'll give the other two a miss for today. So practicing silence and solitude. So this is a challenge for me, just at the outset. So I guess, I see myself as an extrovert, time with people in the world, engaging with them, with others. I find that stimulating and energising. It's what I actually get something, I get feedback from that. The corollary of that is spending time alone in the quiet, contemplative space is actually quite sapping for me. I find it quite tiring. I don't feel refreshed after I do that. It also has a bunch of negative connotations, or can have, because it's not my go-to place. So being alone can feel isolated, cut off, disconnected, loneliness, feeling a bit irrelevant, useless. All those things have the potential to creep in to times when I'm not engaging with others and in that busyness of activity. And so silence and solitude's a big challenge for me. It's not to say I haven't tried it and I can't do it. It's just not something that gives me a lot of stimulus feedback, and so it's not something that's naturally my go-to place. I find it interesting, there's quite a lot of writing around this sort of theme about people going off into another space, into a remote sort of place. There's classic books like Gulliver's Travels and Lord of the Flies I read recently just because I found a copy of it. The Lost series and Gilligan's Island was a favourite of mine, but obviously quite fictitious and good fun. But the Alone series that's been on in recent years is quite interesting. And I know that's more about survival and people being put into a desolate, remote location with little resource and then having to survive. But it's interesting in the number of series of that, how often people actually just can't stand more than a day or two alone with their own company. It's just a thing in the human spirit that, we really a lot of people can buck against having to be quiet and be alone and being, isolated from others. But the practice that Jesus uses when he goes into an alone space is actually very different to all those sort of negative, pejorative words that I described. When Jesus went to a quiet, solitary, secluded, remote place away from others, he was going there for a time alone. He was going there to actually regenerate, to get power and to actually get things sorted out and get his priorities correctly oriented and ordered. There's a word for this. The Greek word for this is eremos. I quite like it because in the book he refers to all the times that Jesus actually goes to the eremos, and it's quite often. So it is actually a tool, or it's a go-to place that Jesus uses. And let's not forget, whilst Jesus is God, is God's Son, Jesus did come to earth 100% human. So he did suffer all of the potential weaknesses and anguishes and all the things that we suffer. So it's not like he got a free ticket. So when he chose to do this, it was obviously doing something for him at a very human level as well as a spiritual level as the Son of God. I'll read you, I suppose, the first time I think this arises in the Gospels. This is straight after the baptism. So the moment Jesus comes up out of the baptismal waters, the skies opened up and he saw God's Spirit. It looked like a dove descending and landing on him. And along with the Spirit, a voice. "This is my Son, chosen and marked by my love, delight of my life." Straight away, Jesus was taken into the wild by the Spirit for the test. The devil was ready to give it. Jesus prepared for the test by fasting 40 days and 40 nights. That left him, of course, in a state of extreme hunger, which the devil took advantage of in the first test. "Since you are God's Son, speak the word, and that will turn these stones into loaves of bread." Jesus answered by quoting Deuteronomy. "It takes more than bread to stay alive. It takes a steady stream of words from God's mouth." For the second test, the devil took him to the holy city. He sat him on top of the temple and said, "Since you are God's Son, jump." The devil goaded him by quoting Psalm 91. "He has placed you in the care of angels. They will catch you, so that you won't so much as stub your toe on a stone. Jesus countered with another citation from Deuteronomy. Don't you dare test the Lord your God. For the third test, the devil took him to the peak of a huge mountain. He jested expansively, pointing out all the earth's kingdoms, how glorious they all were. Then he said, they're yours, lock, stock and barrel. Just go down on your knees and worship me, and they're yours. Jesus' refusal was curt. Beat it, Satan. He backed his rebuke with a third quotation from Deuteronomy. Worship the Lord your God and only him. Serve him with absolute single-heartedness. The test was over. The devil left, and in his place angels came and took care of Jesus' needs. So I read that obviously from the Message version. I quite like that. It's just got a little bit more sort of, bit more nuance in some of the terminology. But it's sort of interesting because straight after he was baptised, surely Jesus was at his peak of his powers. I mean, he'd just been anointed. God said, here's my son with whom I'm well pleased. So it doesn't seem that there would have been any need to go and do any kind of recharging, but that's not actually what happened. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness fasting. Now, if I fasted for 40 days, I don't think I'd be in very good shape. I certainly wouldn't be at the peak of my resistance. If someone came to me with a good offer for something to eat, I'm sure I would have just jumped at that fairly readily. And in fact, something like going somewhere for 40 days without food sounds a little bit like solitary confinement to me. That's the way to crush a person, to break them, to really bring them down to something quite pliable. But it was actually the opposite happened with Jesus. He spent time in the wilderness and he came back completely able to withstand any challenge that Satan threw at him. And it's a sort of an interesting, contrast to how we might think of time in solitary time on our own, disconnected from the world and from others. We need to start thinking about that as a way to recharge, a way to realign our own values, our own priorities, all the things that are bothering us, all the bugs that get into the system. They need to be basically looked at and give Jesus the opportunity to try and sort some of that stuff out for you. If you're able to do that, if that's something you can move towards that as a way of operating, then surely some of that replenishment that Jesus experienced every time he went to the Eremos, he has said that will be available to us. And so there's basically an untapped resource there that, I fully admit that's not something I've been availing myself of very much at all and very lightly. So I'm just looking through my notes just to see if I've missed anything. Yeah, it's interesting because if you go into a quiet place, obviously you're going to remove yourself from the noise and the busyness. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters actually quotes the senior demon Screwtape, saying that the demons rail against silence as their enemy. Devil's realm is a kingdom of noise. And I think there's nothing more than what the devil likes is for us to be busy, to be surrounded by noise, so that we can't actually get clarity on our priorities. We can't hear the Holy Spirit speaking and ministering to us, and therefore we're going to be relatively ineffective in our walk with Jesus. So I guess there is definitely a spiritual dimension to trying to make sure you don't get swamped in too much noise in this very busy age. The last one I was going to talk then about is slowing. And to be quite honest, this one's no easier for me than stillness and quietness. So the message that we get from the world is that slow is bad. There's not many usages or connotations of slow that's a positive thing. So if a movie's slow, it's not good. If the service is slow, we're pretty cheesed off about that. If we talk about someone as being slow, we're generally criticising them. We're not saying they're awesome. We're saying they're a bit deficient. So generally, slowness is not seen as a positive thing. But in God's kingdom, in the kingdom of heaven, what do you see as the highest value commodity in God's kingdom? So that's a trick question. It's not speed, it's love. So love is actually the highest value commodity that God's placed in his kingdom. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and with all your strength, followed by love the neighbour as you love yourself. Now, does anyone want to proffer the idea that love comes fast? Does anyone think that's a thing? Sorry? You can't hurry love. Thank you, Phil. There's a good song about that, isn't there? Yeah, we'll do that later. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think anyone who thinks that they can actually, get a jump start on love and make things happen really quickly, you're just setting yourself up for failure. In our most important relationships, so in your marriage relationship or family with your children as a parent, even in the workplace, anything where you're trying to rush things through and push it really quickly, it's generally not going to come across particularly loving in a particularly loving way. And I guess, the example that Jesus gave us of that also comes from Luke chapter 10. I'll read you that one as well. It's quite short. Luke 10:38. As they continued their travel, Jesus entered a village. A woman by the name of Martha welcomed him and made him feel quite at home. She had a sister, Mary, who sat before the master, hanging on every word he said. But Martha was pulled away by all that she had to do in the kitchen. Later, she stepped in, interrupting them. Master, don't you care that my sister has abandoned the kitchen to me? Tell her to give me a hand. The master said, Martha, dear Martha, you're fussing far too much and getting yourself worked up over nothing. Ooh, that wouldn't have gone down very well. Ooh, ouch. Only one thing is essential, and Mary has chosen it. It's the main course, and it won't be taken from her. So the message to Martha was, slow down, stop, listen, and just hang out with me. And clearly she wanted to get the meal prepared, cater for a bunch of people that were there, put on a good show, etc. I think, we've just been through Christmas time. How many households has that been the objective on Christmas morning? A lot of things to do. Whereas the important thing is actually just to take time, slow down, spend time, listen, be present. And so, I'm not saying there's no place for, putting on a good meal or putting a lot of attention to that sort of thing, but it cannot be done at the expense of spending time and doing things in an unrushed way. I guess in the sort of the digital age that we're at, we're all potentially just one step away from slipping into a hurried environment and a hurried response. There's a saying, one click away from hurry. So I guess that's a challenge to make sure you're not just continually looking for one more distraction. Maybe just the click is the on-off button. Just do that and see if that can actually slow things down for you. So the suggestion is that we should try and cultivate patience by deliberately placing ourselves in a position where we have to wait. So the idea of actually slowing down, so it's slowing your body physically to help slow your mind down, to then help your spirit slow down so you can actually hear God's Spirit ministering to your spirit. I think that's the way it goes, and as I say, this is not something that I've nailed in my life at this stage, but there's a lot of practical tips in John Mark Comer's book about that. I'm going to share a few of them with you. There's 20 in there. I've just got a few less than that I found some of them quite funny actually because they're pretty obvious, but I'm a bit embarrassed to say they're not easy to do. So the first one, drive at the speed limit, not at the speed limit plus what I can get away with. Come to a full stop at stop signs. Really? Really? We're really going to do that? It's actually quite hard because to do that, the car sort of, to actually stop, it sort of rocks back a little bit and then you go again. It's just frustrating, but I think we just need to do it. I'm talking to myself here, by the way. Get into the slow lane, on the road, at the shopping checkout, intentionally delay getting what you want. Then potentially you won't react so badly when you don't get what you want later on. Another suggestion is dumb your smartphone down. Take email and social media off, disable the web browser, delete notifications, ditch news alerts, and keep only the apps that actually make your life simpler. Not the ones that are there for entertainment or just to try and give you more options, just the ones that simplify your life. Another good one that I'm sure many of us have tried with our children but possibly don't do as well for ourselves, parent your phone. Put it to bed by 9 p.m. and don't let it up before 7 a.m. after your morning quiet time, and don't even look at it upon first waking. It's not the first thing you need to be engaging with. Multitasking is a myth. Stick to one task at a time. Multitasking is just sleight of hand for switching back and forth between tasks, none of which I will do well. And it's the drive to achieve more and be more than I am. So just recognise that the thing that you need to do is the one that's in front of you. Do that, do it well, and then plan to do the next thing. Another one I find incredibly painful, walk slower. Actually just move more slowly through life. When I go to Melbourne, I go for a walk with my daughter Hannah through Melbourne CBD. We're about the fastest walkers in the street, and we're very proud of ourselves. We're just passing all these suckers. They've got nowhere to go, nowhere to be. I have to laugh because it's a habit that's very hard to drop, but I think just trying to actually physically move more slowly through space wouldn't be a bad idea. Take a regular day alone for silence and solitude. And as I said, this doesn't naturally come to an extrovert where energy and stimulation comes from others and from interaction. And it's something that I need to try and make time to do. The last one that I'll list, and this is where willpower so far has let me down, even though Matt's encouraged me many times, is take up journaling. Try and get some of your thoughts down on paper somewhere. It doesn't have to be a lot of detail, but just write down what God's saying, what God's doing, what you're seeing, what you're struggling with, what you've been thinking. It's not so much just a log of all the things you've done, but more how's your internal world working for you. And then you can use that to reflect on. As I say, it's not one that willpower has got over the line for me yet, but it's something I'm going to have a go at re-engaging with. So I guess in closing, I'd just say that relational time is wildly inefficient. Special moments are just that over a longer period. So don't think that you can make something really meaningful happen just like that. You do need to put in the time. So put in the time with your relationships, the important ones, your family, your children, your partner, good friends, the people that you really need to go to in times of need. And the special moments that you'll remember, they will come, but you can't actually manufacture that in real time. So the other two areas, Sabbath and simplicity, I think I'll leave them for today. I think my time's done, and that's sort of where my head's been in the other two. So I guess that leaves me as someone who's been given a glimpse into how my life could be different if I could avoid hurry and embrace rest. I'm somewhat of a novice in this space. It's not my natural or learnt strength. But I'm at a stage in life where I want the next 20 years to actually be characterised by some form of renewal in God's calling on my life and on me and my response to that. And so I'm looking to utilise some of what I've talked about today as a way to try and move into that space. So thank you. That's it.